Good morning, it's Mr. Benish, and I'm trying to explain some of the items we have in the display case here at Antioch Middle School. If you came to this video, you probably came through a scan on the glass case with the stuff on display. I want to talk about women in war zone. Historically, women weren't really allowed in the war zones. If we look through history, women tended to support their men during war. Women were a critical part of support during war, but very often weren't allowed in uniform or to be a part of the battlefield. And that has started to change in the last 50 years. In World War II, women played the part of nurses and were allowed in uniform, but they were kept at a very distant place. In Vietnam, they were also nurses and kept out of the combat situation. Now, there's a lot of trauma that comes with a combat hospital, a lot of things that we just don't talk about or acknowledge that we're starting to realize. And as we move on, when we get to the Gulf War, we start seeing women in combat support roles like helicopter pilots, pilots of planes, but still not in combat arms. Combat arms, artillery, armor, and infantry were reserved solely for men up until this is 2021, the past 10 years. I would say 7 years is when they made the transition. As of this recording, the Marine Corps has still not found a role for women in combat arms. They are reluctant to roll that through. But I want to explore my experience in the war. I was in Iraq, Baghdad, 2005, with the U.S. Army, and my experience was a little bit different than others. This is only my experience and only my views, so I'm trying to bring my truths to the understanding. So I'm going to show you a couple images. This is a friend of mine. This is Robin. Robin Grabowski was her married name. Robin I met in Baghdad. She worked in the Green Zone. I worked out of the Green Zone. I lived in the Green Zone and worked on the outside of the Green Zone for part of the time, and part of the time I worked in the Green Zone. She was trained as basically a paper pusher clerk, and she worked filing papers 9 to 5, 5 days a week in the Green Zone. As she moved from her job to her housing, she wore body armor. But when she was off work, we hung out. I met her actually from Country Night when we were DJing. She's about 5'1", and if she's sopping wet, she weighs just over 100 pounds. She's a small woman, but she is a soldier just the same as I am. I'm over 6 feet tall. I'm over 200 pounds. So you couldn't really find much more different than us. But we are both soldiers. We are both trained the same way. We're trained to defend America and all that good stuff. She was a mother of 2 when I met her, and she was off to war. She was actually married to a former soldier who could not, who was sent out of the military, so they needed a paycheck, so she joined the military. So it was an incredible little story. This is her in her body armor and her Kevlar, her helmet. This is how she went from work every day, to and from work in this equipment. She wore a smaller version, but the same body armor and helmet that I wore. She carried a weapon as I carried. And the similarities are there. A soldier is a soldier. Now, I was in combat arms. I was trained in artillery. She was trained to do paperwork, but we were both part of the same U.S. Army. We both had to qualify with our weapons every year. We had to pass the same physical fitness tests. And so we were both soldiers in the U.S. Army at the same time in the same location. And that was my experience with her. This is Morrison. I don't know Morrison very well. I met her once or twice. She was a medic inside the Green Zone at the U.S. Embassy. And my friend, actually my vehicle commander, a guy named Sergeant Wilson, Sergeant Wilson got to know Morrison, and she lived in the Green Zone in that same neighborhood we lived in. And one day he asked her if she wanted to go along on one of our missions because we wanted her to have a medic. But one thing led to another, and we went to a firing range with Blackwater with Morrison. She was not trained to fire on the 249. That's a SAW weapon, the M249. Fires a 5.56 round, same as a M4 or M16, but it's belt fed, so it's kind of cool. And course, she's got her M4 hanging from her uniform. And I have mine as well. And so we're just playing with different weapons at a firing range. We took her to the firing range. You can see on her shoulder, that's her medical insignia. Her unit was a medical unit. This is outside of what she was trained to do or what she expected to do. But she did it very well. It was a lot of fun to hang out and just kind of fire off some weapons together. I was having a good old time. This young woman, I don't know her name, but I know that she worked for Blackwater. Blackwater were private contractors. They were individuals who were hired as civilians to work with a contract for the State Department, Secretary of State, to protect dignitaries and high-profile people that came to Iraq, including senators and congressmen, and all the way up to the President of the United States. They didn't trust the Department of Defense, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps to do that. They outsourced that to private contractors, and she was one of those. Most of these private contractors were former Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, U.S. Army Special Forces. I don't know her backstory. I don't know. She could not have been any of those because it would not have been allowed at the time. But in 2005, she was walking around making a hefty paycheck, probably over $200,000 a year, working beside my unit. And so it was kind of a neat experience. While I was there with the small unit that I worked with, the Blackwater, I know there were at least 2 women out of probably 30 men. 30 men, and there were at least 2 women that I saw that were on the ground doing the same job we were doing. So representation was interesting. Now, here's an interesting story. This is a mom from Baghdad. This was at the nursing school there in Baghdad. There was a medical school where they were training up nurses. This, again, is probably early 2006, I'm going to guess. We were at the medical school. We had brought somebody to talk to somebody inside the building. I just drove a vehicle. I don't know the ins and outs of who was meeting with whom. That was way beyond my need to know. I was outside of our Humvee. I had my Kevlar on, had my body armor on, had my weapon loaded with a magazine in it. I was totally trying to project masculinity and anger and defensiveness. And I'm looking all tough, and this woman walks up to me with his daughter in tow, and she goes, "Are you married?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she says, "I'm sorry." And she walked away. She didn't explain. She didn't tell me any more details. She just walked away. I'm not sure if she was sorry that I was away from my family. I'm not sure if she was sorry that I was in her country stirring things up. I'm not sure if she was sorry that I was not single. I don't know. She just left me wondering, but it very much gave me insight and made me think about how this war was affecting the people of Baghdad and Iraq who lived there 24/7 when I was just visiting for a year. That awareness came to me. This daughter's growing up in a combat zone that was brought by the United States. It's an interesting conversation to have. Not to justify the actions of Saddam Hussein, but that was interesting that the what we brought into it and how we acted in the streets. So this is at the Ministry of Oil, and these little guys were with their mom. This is me on the left in the body armor and the cap. Don't have my Kevlar on. Don't tell my boss. But I was monitoring the radio. Sean, my gunner, took the picture down from the turret. But these 2 little guys, I waved them over. I was teaching middle school at the time, and my students had sent boxes and boxes of Beanie Babies for the holidays. And so I had all these Beanie Babies, and I'm like, what am I going to do with Beanie Babies? So what I did is I took them in the vehicle, in our Humvee, and when we got someplace, I'm like, hey, give them away. So I called these 2 little guys over, and I gave them Beanie Babies. This little guy, I got down on one knee, and this little guy gave me a kiss on the left cheek, the right cheek, and then the left cheek. Really cute. They didn't speak English, and Mom spoke a little bit of English. And, of course, I don't speak Arabic. But it was so cute. But the story behind this is that Mom had brought them to work with her. She had no one to babysit them. So she's actually part of the security force that protects the Ministry of Oil there. And you can see the gate that we came through in the background over Mom's right shoulder. But I'd given them these Beanie Babies as a gift, act of goodwill, and they very much enjoyed them. But it struck me again that here mom is trying to raise her sons in a war zone, trying to provide for them, trying to take care of them. But at the same time, she's in a high-risk environment, high-risk situation, and her children are there with her because she doesn't have other care for them. And that struck me pretty good. So she didn't stop being a mother, even though a war went on, she had to go to work. This is my sister-in-law here on the far right, and she is now a C-130 pilot. But prior to that, in 2004, she was in Kuwait unloading aircraft to go to the war zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. On the far left here is Rob Schneider, and Rob Schneider is an actor. His daughter is a singer. He's an actor. He's in a lot of movies. You'll see him around. Not good movies. I'm not saying they're good movies, but he is in a lot of movies. And she was in a location, where an entry point into the combat zones of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so they would bring in these people. Rob Schneider was touring for the USO, and so she met a lot of famous actors, 50 Cent, Rob Schneider, Juice Newton. They would be brought in by the USO, Uniformed Services Organization, as a way to build the morale of the soldiers and sailors, Marines, and what am I forgetting? Anyway, to boost morale and just kind of encourage everybody to keep doing a good job. And so she would see these people at this entry point. So it was an interesting thing. She stayed in a hotel in Kuwait, and she exercised every morning, and she had a nice buffet every meal. And then she went to the airport to work. So the environment was very different than, say, Morrison or Grabowski with me. But it was still a wartime experience. And now she's a pilot flying through the mountains and having all kinds of adventures. But at this point, she was not. So women have been to war. Women are right beside us in the war. Women are engaged as much as men are in this war. Their numbers are still small. They're not 50% of the population, but they are very much involved in our wartime environment. And there are lots of conversations to be had about women in war. And these are new conversations that we have not had traditionally. So I hope that you're having them. I hope you're thinking about them. So that's what I've got to say about that. Thank you for your time.